So good morning and welcome back after what was quite an intense and quite interesting day yesterday. Thank you for coming back. I hope you all found it useful. I have to say, even after having worked at the agency 23 years, I learn something new every time I listen to one of these sessions. So it's always worth participating. So before we get back into the day's program, just go through some housekeeping. Just to remind you, please make sure your phone, your laptop, your room conference facility is on mute unless you're speaking. It's even after working remotely for a year, people do forget that sometimes. If you want to ask a question, either raise your hand in the chat function or enter a question on the chat function as well. Just as a reminder, we will be sending all the slides to participants after the end of this IP training program. So there is no need to take notes of everything that is said. You will have the slides as well as the videos, the recording that will be available afterwards. The last reminder for you is that there will be a questionnaire sent out by my colleagues Sandra Gogo and Clément Lagalis, who are here supporting this meeting. They will be sending out the questionnaire. It'd be great to have your feedback. That'll help us improve these sessions both for you for the next time and for other colleagues who come and participate. So we will be having two sessions today. The first one is on well-established use and I'll let my colleague introduce herself in a moment. As in yesterday, we will be taking questions and a few Slido questions during the course of the presentation, so stay alert and please do participate. It was very helpful yesterday actually to get the feedback from you as we went through. So if I missed anything out, Sandra, Clément? No? So with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Christelle, who will take you through one of the more interesting aspects of the European legislation, the well-established use. Christelle, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martin. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So this is my pleasure today to give this presentation about well-established use. It's difficult to figure out in this virtual environment how many participants are connected, but I understand that this is a broad audience. And this is my pleasure to introduce you the well-established use application, which are also called bibliographical application. So why the well-established use procedure? This is laid down like in any other legal basis in the Directive 2001/83. And the main driving principle for this legal basis is to avoid the generation of data where the efficacy is recognized by the long-term use and the safety profile is also well accepted. And the purpose indeed is to avoid to conduct again studies that would be ethically questionable, as data has already been generated since a long time. And this would also, by avoiding repetition of the study, this will also avoid waste of resources. So the use of this legal basis we have observed is primarily for national products and often sometimes used for very old products where instead of going perhaps for a generic application, applicants will do it through this well-established use. Or we have seen also a few number of applications coming through the centralized procedure and with a certain kind of profile. So for often medicinal products who were sometimes bringing a new therapeutic innovation, a new indication which was never registered so far. It has been also used in the context of a PUMA, which is a pediatric use marketing authorization, and it comes through the centralized procedure under eligibility criteria, which is called interest of patient at community level. Because often those products, as they are not new active substance, they will not come through the mandatory scope for the centralized procedure. So in terms of experience in the centralized procedure so far with well-established use application, which comes under the legal basis 10A, we have so far only 15 centrally authorized products under this legal basis, whilst at national level, we can see that there's more than 1,000 of products which has been authorized under this legal basis. So from our perspective, at least through the centralized product, is really a very small number of products that are coming with this legal basis. So in terms of principle for this regarding this legal basis is that these procedures are defined as a derogation of the full dossier. So instead of having to generate the data, the legislation foreseen that it can be another means of providing the evidence that is used. Also, this legal basis is without prejudice of the law relating to the protection of industrial and commercial property. And also, this is without prejudice of the rules of data and market protection for medicinal products. It's also important to have in mind that the standard for such application should be the same as for an initial marketing authorization as regards to the principle, for instance, of GMP, GCP, and the level of evidence that will be required to demonstrate the safety efficacy of a claim indication. The legal basis, so this is the exact wording in the legislation for this specific provision. So it is important to highlight that it is foreseen with this legal basis that the result, it may not be required to provide the result of preclinical test or clinical test for that active substance, that it can be demonstrated in a well-established medicinal product which is used within the community for at least 10 years, when there is a recognized efficacy on an acceptable level of safety. And there is specific conditions for this, which are laid down in the Annex 1 of the directive. So in that case, it is possible to replace the data required by the appropriate scientific literature. Here, I will expand a little bit more on these condition criteria which are laid down in the legislation for the demonstration of the well-established medicinal use, on how this should be demonstrated. So it's very important in terms of factor to take into account that there is the time over which a substance has been used in the community. So it's important to keep in mind that it should be used not only worldwide, but it should be also within the community, the union, what has been the time over this substance has been used. It's also important to bring some quantitative aspects regarding the use of the substance. So it can be practical information reflecting the use of the substance. And for instance, there have been sometimes questionnaire conducted to the patient to understand which treatment they have received, so that it provides a proof a little bit of the use of the product. So databases reflecting registry, reflecting the use of the product. So it's also important to provide information about the extent of the use from a geographical perspective, so that, for instance, it could be shown potentially that it's widespread the use in Europe and not just only focus in 1 or 2 member states. And the extent of the use needs also to be discussed, and to which extent also we have collected information on pharmacovigilance information about the use of that substance. What is also important to discuss is the degree of scientific interest in the use of the substance, and this should be reflected by the published scientific references that will be provided in support of the application. And it's also important to show the coherence of the scientific assessment, the publication, so that it provides conclusion in the same way on the safety efficacy. And what was also mentioned is very important that the period of reference should be not less than 10 years in the union. So all these criteria needs to be discussed in the application, and in particular in the module 152 by the applicant. And information needs to be provided to provide the proof of these elements regarding these factors. So this is at validation of such application, we will look at the justification in the module 152, look whether most of the elements have been discussed. However, the relevance of the demonstration, it's a matter of assessment. So it won't be a blocking validation issue. However, this is an important part of the assessments of such application. So in terms of evidence, still to demonstrate the well-established medicinal use, it is important to have in mind that the burden of proof is on the applicant. So it is not for the regulators to, in a way, establish the fact that the active substance in the foreseen medicinal use is well established. So this is really for the applicant to provide the evidence. And it is recognized that in certain situations, such evidence may be difficult regarding the previous factors that we have discussed. The extent of the use and the spread of the use sometimes may be difficult for orphan medicinal products, but it's part of the discussion that the applicant needs to provide in their application. It is also important to have in mind that when reference is made to medicinal use, it doesn't mean exclusively that the substance needs to have been used in the context of a marketing authorization already. We, at least for the one we have seen through the centralized procedure, often sometimes those substances, or at least in the use claim, were not yet already authorized in Europe. So there could be other evidence that can be used to show this medicinal use, for instance, like compassionate use. It is also maybe of importance, even more in the context of this training, that this medicinal use can be also used in a member state before the accession to the EU, and even before the marketing authorization would have been re-registered in accordance to the acquis communautaire. So even this evidence could be taken into account also when for the proof of evidence of the medicinal use in Europe. The prevalence also will need of the condition of the disease will need to be discussed, and this is important, of course, for the demonstration of the extensive use, because this also show, we explain why sometimes maybe such evidence in the context of an orphan may be difficult to provide an extensive use. And also very important that the well-established use is not regarding the active substance. So for instance, in a different indication, but it's really the well-established use in the claimed therapeutic indication. So it's not enough that the substance would have been used for already 30 years, but what is important is the use in the claimed therapeutic indication for at least 10 years. So continue. So now regarding the level of evidence required for the recognized efficacy on the acceptable level of safety. When reference is made to bibliographical literature, the expectation is that it will cover the non-clinical part, the clinical package also in terms of safety efficacy. But indeed, it needs also to include some post-marketing experience on epidemiological data, but provided through literature references. It's still important that these are not the data directly owned by the applicant, but this has been published data, which are available, freely available in the public domain, and which has been published by a reputable source and preferably peer-reviewed, so that it's a trusted source of information. It has been also clarified in the notice to applicants that in terms of literature, scientific monograph can be also acceptable. And for orphan, it has been also clarified that, for instance, compassionate use, named patient basis information data can be also supported information for the demonstration of these factors required for a well-established use. And it has been also introduced that sometimes, exceptionally, some certain data can be provided, own data can have been generated to make the bridge between the literature, the products which is used in the literature references, on the product which is claimed. Because sometimes indeed the literature references can be with another products, and it might be important to bridge, for instance, with a bioequivalence study with the products which is targeted by this application. So to ensure that we can rely on this, the literature references in terms of safety efficacy, provided the quality or the bioequivalence has been demonstrated. So here I would like to emphasize the fact that when there is a claim, for instance, for a new therapeutic use for a known active substance, if the package contains not only literature references, but also clinical data, for instance, or non-clinical data, it's very important to have in mind that a well-established use won't be the appropriate legal basis. And an alternative legal basis might be, so for instance, a full H3 application mixed, where it's, as per the name, it could be a mix of own data and literature references. So I will pause here, and there will be some question asked through Slido, so to take stock a little bit of what has been presented so far. Thank you.
Thank you,
I will
Christelle.
give the floor.
So Clément is going to put up the Slido. So as we did yesterday, slido.com, and using the meeting code #1932. And while you're logging into that, the first question's come up already. So the first question then, listening to what Christelle was just talking to us, what data can a bibliographical application contain? And this is up there. There are multiple answers possible. The literature references for non-clinical data and own data, compassionate use data, bioequivalence. I think we can do a little bit better than 10 people. Oh, yes, we need to get a few more responses. So remember, you can do this either on your mobile phone, your tablet, your laptop. It's one of those rare instances where you're allowed to have a mobile phone in a meeting. There's some clear favorites here. So remember, there are multiple answers. Can we just get a few more responses, people? So remember, literature references, compassionate use data from member states before accession, bioequivalence, and literature references for non-clinical data and own data for demonstration of efficacy and safety. So I'll close this when we get to 45. So we just need 4 more people, 4 more responses. So if you haven't done it, please pick up your mobile phone, your laptop. 42, another 3 people, please. I know it's early. Oh, we're going to get 45. Okay, I think we're probably stuck there. 43, thank you. So Christelle, I haven't voted. Oh, 44, got one more person. Maybe I can be the 45th. So my guess is that it is. Am I allowed to guess? And then you'll correct afterwards?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so my guess, my response would be literature references, compassionate use data from member states, including before accession, and literature references for non-clinical data and own data to bridge for demonstration of efficacy and safety. My guess is that bioequivalence is not one of the bibliographical application data. Is that close?
It's close because indeed literature references is without discussion, that's clear. compassionate use also. The last one was a bit tricky because it mixed literature references with own data. And this is where in that case, this combination is not possible. So at least it won't be allowed to come under this legal basis. On bioequivalence, although it sounds a bit confusing, it happens sometimes that in order to bridge with the information, the safety efficacy information from the literature, it is important to have also bioequivalence to make sure that the products which is at stake behave the same way as the one referred in the literatures. So it could happen that that's the only kind of study we can sometimes accept as part of well-established use, to bridge with the literature references, but important that these data are not to demonstrate safety efficacy.
Thank you very much. Christelle, do we have I think we have a second.
A second one, I think, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you very much, colleagues, for joining in. We've got up to 52. See if we can beat this. So question number 2 is, can a bibliographical application be a reference medicinal product? And here it's a straight yes or no. It's like watching a horse race, there's the bars go up and down. So the moment yes is in the lead, no is catching up. Just a few more. So can a bibliographical application be a reference medicinal product? Are we going to get another couple of people? I was going to try and come in with a guess, but since one of my three guesses before, one of the 3 answers before was wrong, I'm not sure that you're all going to trust me if I give my answer for this one. The moment yes is in the lead, no, just a little bit behind. One more person, and then we'll close. Out of 121 participants, here we are, 50. So we've got 50 responses. So can a bibliographical application be a reference medicinal product, yes or no? And the answer, Christelle, is?
I'm not sure I will disclose it now, because in fact it comes a bit ahead of the next slides to be presented. So you will have the correct response in the coming slides. So okay. So I leave it a bit with the suspense for the exact response to come.
Okay, so before we switch
interesting to have yeah.
Okay, so before we switch back to the slide presentations, just as a reminder, please do use the chat function if you have a question that's not in one of the Slido questions that Christelle has prepared. The whole purpose of these sessions is an interactive learning experience for all of us. I'm certainly learning as well. So do you want to go back to the slide now?
Yeah.
So to remember, 63% of you said yes. About the bibliographical.
So to continue with some characteristic of well-established use applications. So this is a legal basis which is exempted from the pediatric requirements. So this is one of the legal bases for which there will be no need to foresee a pediatric development or potentially request a waiver ahead of the submission of such application. There is a requirement to provide as part of the application a risk management plan, like for any other marketing authorization application. So there is no exemption waiver for this kind of requirements. So there's a need also indeed to have a plan for any perhaps post-authorization event studies. Also, in terms of PSUR, in principle, this is exempted. However, there's a possibility for competent authority to request a PSUR if there could be pharmacovigilance who needs to monitor further the use of in this medicinal use targeted by this application. And I have to say that for the ones that come through the centralized procedure, they are often coming with medicinal use that has never been registered. So we most of the time we are asking for PSUR to be submitted also on a regular basis at the beginning. On the additional monitoring in terms of whether to have this black triangle will follow the standard rules for these products. So now court cases which have provided some answer to some particular question regarding well-established use application. So this one is about orfacol. So a well-established use which the CHMP has agreed to be a marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances. However, the Commission has a different interpretation that it wouldn't be compatible to have such a well-established use application where the expectation is to have already well-established efficacy on acceptable level of safety that will come with a marketing authorization where we will say that there's not a comprehensive set of data regarding the use claim. So this has been challenged and been the object of a court cases. And the conclusion of the court is that, in fact, this is compatible. There is nothing in the legislation that will prevent that potentially a well-established use application will also be possible to come under marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances, where it is acknowledged that, in particular for orphan, there may be sometimes difficulties to generate the level of evidence, even through literature references over even beyond 10 years. So legally, it was accepted that to accept such marketing authorization application, and then there might be for such application data to be generated post-authorization. And also this court case is clarified that the long-term establishment of the efficacy could be based on the hospital or compassionate use hospital preparation use for such products, on that, for instance, will have been used in the context of named patient basis. So that was two important clarification with this court case. On the next one, which will answer the second question of the Slido, it's the Ola Farm court, the ruling. And the question was whether it is a well-established use application could be a reference medicinal product. So would have in that case 8+2 years data regulatory protection. So it was triggered by a generic, the authorization of a generic referring to a reference medicinal product which has been authorized under the Article 10A. And the court ruled that it is possible that a well-established use could qualify as a reference medicinal product in the same way as a reference medicinal product authorized under Article 8.3, in the understanding that it's a full application, and the difference being that maybe the data are not the own data, but it's still full even though it's literature references. And as such application will be entitled to 8+2 year regulatory protection. However, it does not prevent that, as these data are freely accessible in the public domain, if another applicant wants to submit a well-established use application for a similar claim, it might be possible potentially to come with a parallel application also under 10A. But not as a generic before the 10 years would have elapsed. So indeed, the correct response was yes, well-established use products can be a reference medicinal product. So then there was a majority already on having this background for the particularities of well-established use application. So a few more procedural aspects regarding the constitution of an Article 10A application. So it will be, as I mentioned, a full application. So will contain a module 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And for the module 4 and 5, as it was mentioned, it needs to be only literature references, with the exception of potentially some study to bridge with the literature references, but this one data should not be there to demonstrate safety efficacy, only to make the bridge with the literature. And then the criteria for the well-established use needs to be discussed in the module 152. And also in the IPA, so the CHMP assessment report, which is published at the end of the procedure, there's a specific section which is called type of application, where the CHMP would have discussed the main factors for coming as a well-established use application. And I will illustrate this with a few examples of authorized products. So the first example is Tepadina, which is an orphan medicinal product in hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, which was authorized in 2010. So in terms of the 4 criteria which needs to be discussed during the assessment, assessed by the CHMP during the assessment, is the time over which the substance has been used. So here, for instance, the substance was used in this indication in the late 80s already. So when the application was submitted in 2008, there was already quite a long period of time since when this substance in the claim medicinal use was already used, although perhaps not yet authorized formally. So in terms of also providing some quantitative information about the use or in the claim indication, it was illustrated the proof was coming from databases through hospital data over more than 10 years. In terms of the degree of the scientific interest, this was reflected by a high number of frequent publications regarding the specific use again of that substance. And in terms of coherence of the scientific assessment, we can see that there was the quality of the data was quite robust, and that there was a consistency also in the outcome and the conclusion of these references. And here, the data package was exclusively constituted of this published literature in the module 4 and 5. The next slide, it's another example. So ketoconazole, also an orphan in the Cushing syndrome. So it's happened at the time this ketoconazole product was withdrawn for antifungal indication through a referral procedure. So the cream was called to be revoked in the use of this antifungal indication. However, it's appeared that this product was used off-label in Cushing syndrome. And there was, so if the product will be withdrawn from the market in the other use that was hold, then it will prevent some patients to use it off-label as it was before. So some applicant came forward to submit an application based on literature references in this so far non-authorized indication, so Cushing syndrome, and in the end an authorization was granted in 2014. So, so again here there was a long use of these products in the Cushing syndrome since the 80s, so more than enough time over which the substance was used in this indication. In terms of quantitative aspects, this was provided by 2 main official sources. So the compassionate use in France, which was represented at the time 250 patients, and a European registry in this indication. The degree of scientific interest, also quite a number of scientific publications on consistent result outcome coming out from these literature references, which also were peer-reviewed bibliographical information. So here we had so also the module 4 and 5 based on literature data, but what was also important is that a bibliographical data was provided. So here with the form was tablets, so to bring the evidence between the tablets of Nizoral that were used in the literature references on the products claimed from HRA. So that's it for this example. On the last one is Soma kit, also on orphan. So indeed, we can see that a lot of these products are sometimes orphan products. So in cancer indication, and here it was use a bit more recently, so it was authorized in 2016, and there was evidence on here. I have to say, I realized that yes, it can be a bit challenging, the level of evidence. The 10 years they may have been used, perhaps also supported a bit before, but maybe the main use was after 2001, although there may have been some data perhaps not extensive, and there was more than 1,000 patients so available from the published data, and also in terms of degree of the scientific interest was that there was also a lot of publication, or it was even reflected in a scientific guideline. And so that was the same in terms of coherence, the fact that it was also reflected in scientific guideline from well-known scientific society was also acknowledging the value of the substance. And in terms of data package, here it was also mainly module 4 and 5. So I think with this last example, this is closing my presentation on the well-established use application, and I think there will be time now for some questions. On here, you would have a list also of the key references, reference documents, so the directive, of course, the notice to applicants, where there's an explanation about understanding of this legal basis, and we have also some question and answer published on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Christelle. So we have, just as a reminder, I put in there, we have one more Slido question from Christelle, just to test how much you've been paying attention. Please do use the chat function for any questions, or raise your hand if you want to ask a question directly. But we have a question here from Zorica P, which is, what kind of own preclinical clinical studies other than bioequivalence are acceptable or needed for this type of application? Christelle, can you see the question there? So what kind of own preclinical or clinical studies other than bioequivalence are acceptable or needed for this type of application?
I have to say that so far what we have seen, it's there can be perhaps dissolution data, but this is mainly what we have seen in terms of bridging evidence provided as part of the application. This is mainly the kind of study that we have seen so far.
Thank you. So we've got two other questions from. So the first one, then the other one is, during a well-established use application, we can require additional dissolution data in order to provide differences than other medicines used as a reference medicinal product. So the question is about the additional dissolution data.
I believe this is part of the quality. On the quality, in a way, is perhaps less contentious because it's really always own data from the applicant about the quality. So there is perhaps no problem that here, indeed, there could be some dissolution data provided also to bridge with the literature references. I think it becomes more borderline when it comes about more preclinical or clinical data, when you need this kind of data to bridge with the literature references, where it is very important that in that case, it's really bridging data, but it will not be in a way there to support safety efficacy. That's sometimes maybe what could become a bit more borderline.
Okay, so to the person who asked the question, I hope that answers. Please do use, if that doesn't quite answer your question, please put it back in the chat. There's a third question here, which is to ask you, Christelle, could you clarify again the issue about data exclusivity for the application and about the applicability of data exclusivity if it becomes a reference product?
Yeah, it's a bit, I acknowledge a bit question, tricky. Huh? Yeah, exactly. Indeed, it's a bit difficult to figure out that at the same time the data can be available in the public domain and normally are freely accessible by different parties. but that the dossier as such from an applicant will be entitled to 8+2 years. And in a way, what is protected is the fact that an applicant as a data package who has put an application which might be entitled to a protection of 8+2 years. So meaning that another applicant cannot come just as, for instance, a generic without respecting the 10 years protection. So 8 years before they are able to submit. So this is preventing that a generic company will just do an average application just based on bioequivalence referring to well-established use products that has been authorized just a few months earlier. However, it is recognized that it does not prevent that if another applicant wants to also submit in parallel a well-established use, using the same literature references, it will be possible, but still, so they can use some non-clinical clinical data that are available in the public domain, but of course the applicant has to make the development of the product itself. And this is perhaps where sometimes, there may not be a lot of competition in this area, in particular for those we have seen through the centralized procedure, because they are orphan, and we know that the market then it's quite also limited.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one I remember we discussed a few years ago. Where I think we had a similar potential application like that. So it's actually a very. Go ahead.
No, it does happen indeed sometimes that yes, two may come a bit in parallel of this application. And sometimes for the same products where applicant may have chosen a different kind of regulatory strategy. One may try the route of a 10A, and another one would try the route more of an hybrid application where the user reference medicinal products, yet authorized for, of course, more than 10 years in a different kind of indication, and through the hybrid, they are claiming the new use, and they will do more a mix sometimes of literature references on some additional data that they would have generated. So it can depend of the package how the applicant have chosen to develop their data package, that sometimes for the same active substance on same targeted medicinal use, we can see coming in parallel two regulatory strategies, slightly different regulatory strategy from the applicants.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we have we've got two more questions up on the chat function. So this is from the colleagues at the Sarajevo laboratory of the ALMBIH. For the assessment of the M3 quality part of the dossier, should the marketing authorization holder provide us, or the applicant rather than the MAH, provide particular reference product as well as in vitro dissolution profile? It's quite a specific question. I don't know if you.
Yeah. It is not per se a requirement that it is always the expectation, but indeed as part of the more the clinical discussion on non-clinical discussion on they will have to discuss on which data they are relying, which product has been at use in those literature references. So sometimes there have been perhaps mainly one product use, and some other times it can be for very old products, chemicals, sometimes a range of different products. So it might be difficult, and it's where it will be a case-by-case approach to discuss whether there's a need to really have dissolution data, maybe with one main product used across the literature references. It's not a requirement, a legal requirement, but sometimes it can be important, depending of whether one reference product will be predominant in the literature references.
Okay.
And it's still also available, because sometimes you may also have the challenge that maybe even these old products may no longer be available.
That's actually a good point, especially when we're talking about well-established use over a period of 10 years or more. Yeah. Especially where
and we could have a lot.
Go.
No, and indeed they can be sometimes more hospital preparation.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Yes.
Sorry.
And then there's actually that links really quite well to the fourth question we have here in the chat function, which is, when can we as regulators require bridging data? And it's a subjective question, I think, or are there any objective criteria for when we can require bridging data?
No, no, indeed, it's a case-by-case situation. It's often something better to discuss in advance through a scientific advice. And often for those applications, although it's literature references, they are not straightforward. They are quite challenging in terms of constituting an appropriate data package, and it is, often foreseen that applicant will come forward first with a scientific advice, discuss the data required, and that will be one of the questions that will be discussed on. I think for me, it's mainly whether indeed it's in the literature references is predominantly one product being used, and also depending of the reproduce also this about the stability of the products, and whether there could be variability also in the pharmacokinetic aspects and aspects like this, which may be important indeed to have in that case the bridging data to ensure that we are products behaving the same way as the one in the literature references. So I think it will depend a bit of the substance or the products, the complexity perhaps of the form or these kind of things.
Thank you, Christelle. And I hope that answers the question. But actually, it raises a question in my own mind that I want to, just picking up and listening to you this morning. Could you just give us a sense how much of the when we consider well-established use application, how much of it is subjective in terms of the assessors and the committee when it looks at a well-established use application? How much is really objective? Because I get a sense that there's quite a mix of judgment values.
Yeah, and they are indeed, as I just mentioned, very challenging application that can be subject to a lot of discussion by even the CHMP, and they can be quite split view sometimes on the level of evidence on that is required on the they're often quite debated by the CHMP. So where we can see some may have been quite straightforward in terms of level of evidence in literature references, where it is quite well recognized, and the references, the sources are robust, and the results are really consistent. But there could be other situations where I have to say, even without any secrets, the CLNR application was, for instance, one that was very challenging because there was quite limited information on the sometimes the use is very focused in one or two member states. So it can be in terms of to which extent is it meeting the requirements, is really a matter of assessment on discussion agreement by the CHMP. We also discuss a lot with the Commission those applications when it's not so straightforward on the. Yeah, and it's sometimes also important to consider that the added value of bringing perhaps on level some uses that have been off label for ages. So it's a balance sometimes to find in terms of requirements. And it was very welcome also this court ruling clarifying that it's not incompatible to have a well-established use substance being also with a data package that is considered less comprehensive, because maybe it might be difficult to establish the appropriate evidence because of the limited prevalence of the disease, and then those applications may, although they have been well-established, we are qualifying them as well-established use, they still require some further characterization post-authorization.
Okay, thank you. So I think probably now is the time to pass to our final Slido question. So Clément, if you could put it up. So again, I think question number 3 or number 4, isn't
it? 3, I think, but I wonder if...
Yeah, so question number 3. Is a bibliographical application compatible with... And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 answers. So, and that you can choose multiple, and I won't tell you, I have actually just cheated and looked at Christelle's answers because I'm not sure I knew what the answers were. Wow, okay. One person has answered. So the choices you have are 8+2 year regulatory protection, orphan status, marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances, 12-year literature reference in the active substance of a different medicinal use, and a new indication claim. So there are multiple answers. If you could just mute yourself, though it's good to remind people to participate. So we have 44 respondents so far. Again, just a few more. We'll use the 50 as the cutoff point again. Interesting range of responses here. Just a few more. Remember, so the options we have here are the bibliographical application compatible with and or either orphan status, 8+2 year regulatory protection, exceptional circumstances, 12-year literature reference of the active substance in a different medicinal use, and a new indication claim. Can we find those last two respondents? Otherwise, you're going to have to put up with me guessing. Okay. Clément, shall we, I think probably people are hesitating here. So can we perhaps close it up now? And the correct answers are we at the 50? So we can close, Clément, if you just close it off. And the correct answers to the question voila. So congratulations. 8+2 years regulatory protection. I think many people got that in the orphan status. I think where it was perhaps less clear is about the exceptional circumstances, and there was responded in one of the court cases that Christelle discussed, and a new indication claim. The one thing that you cannot use the bibliographical application for is a 12-year literature reference in a different medicinal use. So, Christelle, do you have any comments about that, and specifically about why it can't be used for this the different medicinal use?
Yeah, indeed, the extent of the use is not regarding the active substance, but it's really the active substance in the claim therapeutic use for that application. And for instance, coming back to my example of ketoconazole, it could have been used for years in the antifungal indication. As the company was now claiming the Cushing syndrome, what we needed to see is the use for more than 10 years in the Cushing syndrome. And they could have been brought all the evidence about the other indication. This wouldn't have been sufficient with the pivotal data, at least, to establish the safety efficacy in the claim indication. Yes. So this is important to keep that in mind, that it's really regarding the claim use.
Yep.
On the new indication, it's a bit, I acknowledge, a bit confusing also. At least the one we've seen through the centralized procedure is often indication that were not authorized yet. There have been a lot of off-label use in this claim indication, but they were not formally yet authorized. And so in our jargon, they will be regarded as new indication. So, but there's enough literature evidence to establish safety efficacy. So it's just that well-established use is not incompatible with the new indication claim.
So perhaps instead of a new indication, we should be talking about a non-approved indication.
Potentially, yeah, indeed. Yeah. Maybe perhaps it will be less confusing, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. Christelle, thank you. I think that actually it's clearly colleagues have really paid attention and absorbed the information you've shared. We have a final question here, actually, on the chat function, which is, you spoke at the beginning about only 15 applications, well-established use in the centralized procedure compared to thousands in the national procedures. So do you have any percentage, any figures you can share about how many well-established use applications have been approved versus all approved medicines by other types of applications within the EU? So it's a bit of a challenging question. If you don't have a specific figure, perhaps a ballpark.
No, I won't have the figures for across the EU. All different routes of authorization confounded. I won't have this information. I don't have it by heart even for the centralized procedure, but knowing that we have more than 600 also centrally authorized products, at least for the centralized procedure, is a small subset of products being authorized through this legal basis.
Okay.
But I don't have these numbers as.
Okay, apologize then to the colleagues who asked that question. We don't have those data. We're about an hour into this session. There's no particular need to take the full hour and a half. And Christelle, I think you've given us a phenomenal amount of information about well-established use, and I've picked up a couple of things I didn't know as well. Do colleagues have any other questions? Aha, okay. So we have I have a question that's been sent to me. Christelle, could you please clarify again what post-authorization measures could be required to provide additional clinical evidence in a well-established use application? It's a good question, actually.
Yeah. I would expect more for, in particular, in the context of marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances, that these data are mainly safety data. So it might be more post-authorization safety studies. I will need to look at, for instance, OFACOL, maybe. I don't have by heart what were the specific obligation requested, but I will believe it's more looking at the safety.
Okay. Thank you. But actually, it's a good reminder that actually all the things that we spoke about in yesterday's session, pre-authorization and post-authorization, still apply to well-established use application. They are no different from any other application in terms of the requirements for post-authorization, safety, efficacy, pharmacovigilance, and all the usual conditions apply, and the usual regulatory tools can be applied to those authorizations. So in the absence of any other questions, perhaps what we're going to do is to close this particular session. And I can't see any more questions up in the chat function. So Christelle, can I just say thank you on behalf of all the participants and from us here in the room for sharing this morning. For the participants, we come back in 1 hour's time and we have a session on antimicrobial resistance, the silent killer. And it'd be great to see you again in an hour. Time for a cup of coffee. Christelle, merci beaucoup. And we'll see you again. Thank you for the high level of participation. And we'll see you in 1 hour's time. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for the interaction, and have a good continuation for this training. Thanks. Bye.
Good morning again. Thank you for the colleagues who joined us back on time. We're going to give about 1 more minute before we start the session. So this is a particularly wide-ranging topic, so I'm going to start on time. So welcome back to everybody. I want to welcome you to this final session for today, and the topic is the fight against antimicrobial resistance. The presenter will be my colleague Radu Voskross, who will introduce himself briefly, again, as I just said, please make sure your device, your phone, your laptop, your iPads, other tablets are available, are all on mute. And we'll go straight into the session with Radu. So Radu, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues, to all of you. My name is Radu Voskross. I'm a scientific officer, and I work for the Biologic Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy Office at the EMA. We are actually, one of our tasks is indeed our involvement in all the measures, all the fight that we are as an agency, together with our sister agencies in Europe, and with the European Commission, actually with the whole European regulatory network, are conducting and are fighting against AMR, against antimicrobial resistance. I think, before going into my presentation, this aspect, which is depicted here on my introductory slide, is one of the important messages that I would like to convey to you: the fact that we all need to be part of this effort. We need to cooperate. We need to be, all of us involved, regulators, clinicians, veterinary colleagues, and many others. So, all the stakeholders need to be part of this effort to make it successful. Nobody can make it on their own at the national or local level. So that's very important. Next slide, please. Since I was, first of all, let me maybe try very quickly to thank the organizer for inviting me to give this training. This is not a presentation and a conference, so we have a bit of time allocated. So I would like to invite you to also try and answer a few questions during my talk. This would hopefully reinforce certain messages and would also make you following the slide a bit more entertaining, I hope. So you will see this is a wide range presentation. It's not a case study, so I hope you're ready to give it a try. And since the title of the presentation is about the fight against AMR, it may seem reasonable to make sure that we're all on the same page with respect to what that is. So you see on this slide this easy but important question: what is actually antimicrobial resistance? And maybe we can put a few options on screen with this slider tool. So please don't shy away and click the buttons. I think this is by no means, it's just a good way to understand what the previous knowledge is on the topics that I will be basing on. So nothing else than that. Just a few more seconds to allow you to still use the time to vote or to choose the right things. I think we're already at 30. I don't know, Martin, how many answers we should be awaiting.
Well, I've been a little bit harsh this morning, but I think you can probably go with this, just so we don't.
Okay, that's very good, and thank you very much. I think the answer, the correct answer, is the first one, which I think the vast majority of you has indeed highlighted. And if we can go back to my next slide, actually, you will see also why the answer. So why the other two answers are not entirely what actually we mean by AMR. So let's start with what an antimicrobial is. And actually, an antimicrobial is an active substance of natural or synthetic origin that kills or inhibits the growth of microorganisms. And most of the time it's an antibiotic, but it can also be an antiviral, an antifungal, or an antiprotozoal. So I think an antimicrobial is broader than only an antibiotic. So it's also why antimicrobial resistance is not synonym with antibiotic resistance. Now, with regard to the definition, okay, there is no standard definition as we would expect in a dictionary, but actually it's the ability of microorganisms of being increasingly resistant to an antimicrobial to which they were previously susceptible. So what's important also to highlight are a few important points here. Despite I'm not giving a lecture on AMR per se, I think it's worth mentioning that development of AMR is unavoidable once an antibiotic starts to be used. Actually, it's a mere consequence of the general law of natural selection, and also here the strongest survives. But despite the fact that AMR development per se is unavoidable, the speed with which it develops may be exacerbated by a number of human factors, among which the inappropriate use and the overuse of antimicrobials in both humans and animals is very important. Once acquired, AMR conferring mutations can be transmitted between bacteria, as you can see. Next slide, please. On this slide, you see the physician that discovered penicillin, Sir Alexander Fleming. It's, as you all know, probably a Scottish physician and microbiologist who actually became famous by two discoveries. He apart from penicillin, he also discovered the enzyme lysozyme, which is also well known. For the discovery of penicillin, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1945. And actually, in his speech, when he accepted the prize, it's actually the only prize, as far as I know, that he ever accepted for his activity, his prodigious activity, actually. He actually foresaw that AMR could and would be fostered by human factors. And you can see on the right hand on the slides, I try to highlight in red what he said when he delivered that speech. Next slide, please. Fleming was right, unfortunately, and today AMR has become a global health threat that needs to be tackled urgently by all stakeholders. And on this slide, in the figure in the middle of the slide, you see that actually we have 5 major antibiotic targets: the bacterial cell wall, the cell membrane, the protein synthesis, the DNA and RNA synthesis, and the folic acid metabolism. These bacterial targets are different or non-existent in eukaryotic cells, including those of humans, which actually means that antibiotics are relatively non-toxic drugs. And I'm saying relatively because some have some important degree of toxicity nevertheless. You see in the figure some examples that we all know. We have classes of antibiotics, beta-lactams, such as penicillin, cephalosporins, and carbapenems that block the synthesis of the bacterial cell wall structure, which is absent in higher organisms, but is essential for bacterial survival. When it comes to resistance to antibiotics, that generally occurs through 4 general mechanisms, which are target modification, efflux, immunity and bypass, and enzyme catalyzed destruction. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this, but what I think it's important on the right-hand side of these slides that you see the most important factors that drive or aggravate the AMR crisis in which we are today. And I already mentioned the overuse of antibiotics, both in humans and animals, the lack of compliance to prescribed treatment, the poor infection control measures, the poor hand hygiene and sanitations, along with the fact that actually the new antibiotics pipeline is rather dry, so to speak. So very few new antibiotics have been discovered in the recent years. Next slide, please. Just to close these introductory remarks, I would like to tell you or to remind those of you who know that, we started with the question, what is the definition of AMR? And with that in mind, let us just look for a second at these results, which are for me a bit staggering, of a multi-country survey which was conducted by WHO in 2015, and which actually asked a number of interesting questions. And you see that 3/4 of the respondents at the time thought that antibiotic resistance happens when the body becomes resistant to antibiotics, as opposed to what we know, that it's actually the bacteria and not the humans or the animals that become resistant to antibiotics. And you see there are also some other quite striking findings, I would say. Now, you will say that the situation may have changed, and probably it has changed to a certain extent in the last 6 years. But this is the other thing that I want to highlight to you, that the other important tool which is available to us regulators is and not only actually, is the communication tool. We need to come out and explain to the public whenever we feel that this is needed. So quite interesting results. Next slide, please. Let's go to another question. So how long do you think it takes for a new antibiotic to develop resistance? I'm not going to ask colleagues on this one to put the Slido in motion. I will actually, I don't know if there's anybody willing to express yourself, please take the floor. If anybody is willing to do that, that's fine. Or alternatively, I'm happy to answer it myself. So I don't know, is anyone who wants to come and speak to that? If so, just unmute yourself and please express yourself. I'm not going to wait too long, though.
They're not usually this shy.
Okay, let me then. I mean, let's give them some time to warm up. Can I have the next slide, please? I will try to answer it myself, and I will try to do that with some diagram from a published paper. Let's concentrate on the upper side of this diagram, which actually pertains to antibiotics. Here you see that actually the answer, if you were to answer how long did it take for resistance to appear, actually the answer varies actually from compound to compound. The worrisome thing here to me is that this time period can be rather short for some of the antibiotics on this slide. And this is something that, again, you will need to consider whenever you will be making assessments of potentially new antibiotics that you will be assessing. And you will see later in the presentations that we have a guideline, an EMA guideline for the development of antibacterials that has some very relevant provisions to that effect. So one of the important thing and message is that whenever you have a new dossier, a new antibiotic, you need to consider, quite importantly, its potential of developing resistance and the speed of that factor, if it at all can be evaluated at that stage. Next slide, please. This is another question. For this one, I will ask you, what is the magnitude of AMR today? Let's not, I mean, here there is more than one question on this slide. Let me try only one. Let's try to see what we think the magnitude in terms of deaths per year, let's say. So what are we having here? Yes, this is the counter is at 0. So I gave you 1, 2, 3, 4 options here. So what do you believe? Is it 300,000 deaths, 500, 700, or 1 million deaths per year worldwide? It's just an estimation, so of course it's.
As you say, this is worldwide.
Definitely only one answer that's right, but anyway, I'm curious to see what your estimation is.
It's interesting to put this in the context of COVID-19, where we're currently estimating 2.5 million people have died.
Yes, it is. That one, I think, benefits now from quite a bit of attention from all of us, rightfully so. This one is a bit more silent still.
Yes.
But it may well be that, it will be our next. Okay, I will give a few more seconds because the result, we have quite close results. I see. I don't see the exact numbers, but I imagine they must be very close. At least. Okay. So I don't know, Martin. You tell me when we stop the poll, and then I will.
Oh, come on! We need at least another couple of people, guys. See if we can get up to at least 40 respondents.
Very good. Guys, please contribute to make the sample size such that
it's got to be significant. Otherwise, is underpowered.
Significant, maybe not, but yeah, at least we will.
One more. Looking for one more respondent.
One more who wishes to express him or herself. Okay. There we go.
Oh, interesting response.
Okay, so
Radu, over to you then.
It's quite interesting. Actually, it has changed with this last request. I think we have two winners, none of which is actually the right one. The right one is the one which came on the third place, actually. And let's go back to the slide. Thank you very much. That's quite interesting. But actually, 1/3 each thought it would be within that, one of the three numbers there. Can we go to the next slide? Yes. So actually, the number, as I said, it's actually 700,000. That's worldwide, which equates with one person dying every 45 seconds. In the European Union, the number estimated is 33,000 deaths per year. You see, if you translate this into something which stays to mind, we were looking at something equivalent to a Boeing 747 crashing every week. That's staggering. That's a lot. And this is why the magnitude of the problem is so important. It's not only the deaths, which of course are the most important things that we need to avoid, but it also has a very high economic cost. We are looking at present at more than 1.5 billion euros per year lost by infections produced by multi-drug resistant pathogens. So it's quite an important thing. Next slide, please. To make it even worse, you see on this slide what the forecast is, how it is foreseen that this would develop. And you see on this slide, it's a nice visual representation of what the prognosis is. We are now, as I said, at 700,000, but it is foreseen that in 2050 we will have 10 million deaths per year from infections with multi-drug resistant pathogens. And just for you to compare, it will be more than what cancer produces today in terms of deaths per year. That's really very bad, if I may say, and I think it's something that indeed we need to think about, we need to consider, because it's so important. I hope with that I have convinced you about how dire the situation may become. It's actually already quite dire. So I hope we are now all aware of this. Next slide, please. But what do you think? I mean, we are now aware, we have been aware. But do you believe our politicians, our political leaders are aware regarding the menace of AMR? Do you think they're sufficiently aware? So maybe we can have again, our system here. There are two options here, very simple. Do you believe, yes, they are sufficiently aware, or no, they are not sufficiently aware? So let's very quickly press some buttons to see here what you believe.
And just to reassure colleagues, your answers are not tracked anywhere, so nobody can ever know what you're responding.
Very, very much so, indeed. Thanks, Martin, for pointing that out, indeed. Just a few more to make the numbers. Very good. I think we can stop it here. I think the percentages would go up or down by 1 or 2%, but actually you seem in the vast majority to believe that they are not sufficiently aware. I'm very happy to to announce you that actually in the European Union, but also beyond that, they are sufficiently aware. They are sufficiently aware. This is, and I will explain immediately why that is the case. So maybe I can have the slides back. And the next slide, please. So actually, in the last decade, AMR, which at the beginning was indeed a bit neglected and a bit, running in the background with not much awareness, unfortunately, has made it to the political agenda. We have had a number of forums, of groups that have been actively involved. I'm not going to go. This is a speech per se, actually, but what I want to tell you are a few things. So first of all, we have in the European Parliament a very active group of MEPs, so members of the European Parliament. We see here a photo of the group from the previous legislature, but we have now new group as well, as active as this one as well. So we have colleagues that are really very active. They are very enthusiastic, and of course they have they're one of the important pillars, if I can say, because of course they can propose legislation, help a lot in promoting certain initiatives. You see on the same slide there is a photo which probably you will recognize Chancellor Merkel in the middle of the group. This comes from the G20 summit, which was hosted in 2017 by Germany, where actually there was an historic commitment of the leaders of these nations, which are part of the G20, to combat antimicrobial resistance and tuberculosis. And actually, 2017, you will see later in the presentation, was quite a remarkable year from that perspective, because also our European Commission has adopted what is now the well-known One Health Action Plan against antimicrobial resistance. Here you also see that the WHO has had a number of initiatives, and here actually on this slide you see the launching of the Global Leaders Group on AMR that includes global government ministers, along with some important leaders of opinion, such as CEOs of big pharma companies or the head of the Wellcome Trust. So quite important stakeholders participating and trying to look as to what needs to be done in the future. And also AMR will be quite on the top of the upcoming G7 agenda, which is the group of the most 7 industrialized countries that will be soon held in the United Kingdom as well. So let's go to the next slide. And when it comes to the EU, which I think is maybe it's actually the focus more of my talk today. There have been a number of very important initiatives. As I mentioned already, the European One Health Action Plan against AMR, this is a very important document that has been adopted in 2017, and that I can only warmly recommend you to look into and yes, consider, because it's one of the important documents. We have also in Europe, last year, the European Commission published the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, which also includes AMR and some flagship initiatives in the fight against it, to be launched this and next year. And you see here, I think I won't be reading all of this, but it's important to see that 2021 is one of the years in which there will be initiatives related to AMR. You see this pilot approach to R&D and public procurement for antimicrobials and their alternatives. And I see here a question that we will be also tackling in one of my next slides, but also here to say that yes, alternatives to antibiotics are also something important that needs to be considered, that is considered in the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe and also at the EMA level. Also importantly, and I will also have a few slides to that, providing some incentives for novel antimicrobials. There are also activities to promote investment and coordinate research and development, as well as manufacturing, deployment, and use for novel antibiotics. There is this new, as you will have heard, the new European BARDA, the Health Emergency Response Authority, we shortly HERA, which is a new agency, a new EU agency that will be created, and it will probably have an important role in coordinating the fight on AMR as well. There are also other initiatives in this. Let me also tell you on this slide, importantly to highlight to you, is the EU for Health program. That's actually the European, it's actually started as the European Union's response to COVID-19, which, as you know, has had and still has a major impact on medical and healthcare staff, patients, and health systems in Europe. But actually, it's all about a huge investment of more than 5 billion euros, is the largest health program ever in monetary terms in Europe, in the European Union. It will provide funding to European Union countries, health organizations, and NGOs, including urgent health priorities that are reducing the number of AMR-resistant infections, and actually also will aim at improving vaccination rates. So this is the new health program 2021-2027. So it's something that you may also wish and warmly encourage you to have a look at it, and to look at its provisions. There are also other initiatives that are not on this slide. I mean, just to mention the Farm to Fork strategy, which is a tool to help shape the EU's path towards sustainable food systems, with a quite ambitious objective of reduction by 50% of the overall EU sales of antimicrobials for farmed animals and in aquaculture by 2030. So quite a number of important things. Next slide, please. But this is, I tried to give you the large, political and not only, framework, strategic framework, and so that you see all the measures about AMR that are going on at different levels. But what can we as regulators do to tackle AMR? Because we are regulators, and of course, we need to be informed, we need to communicate, as we just discussed, but we also can do certain things in our function. So I think this one also has a few options that we can put on screen for you to quickly press some buttons. Of course, all the answers should be the last one, somehow shows up at the first one, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. I will give you a few moments.
What can we as regulators do? So update the guidance to developers, interaction with other regulators, focus on alternative therapies, and early engagement with developers. Or is the answer all of those? Are some of them so there seems to be, Radu, you seem to have pitched the questions quite well here. People are responding nicely.
Well, I suppose this expresses also some previous, quite an interesting and thorough previous knowledge about the topic, which is very good, because what it means is that our audience is well aware into the majority of the matters, which is quite important, because I think we need to work together to make things work here.
Okay, so I think probably you got your answer there.
Here, you are right into saying that all the answers are correct. So I think the vast majority made the right choice. Can I have the slides back, please? And the next one. So you see, actually, you know, my question, I didn't want to put all these options on screen. Actually, we do more than the options, all the above, what I just said. I will go through each and every one of them. So maybe we can go to the next slide. And just before me doing that, next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So I think before going into them one by one, I would like to note that we have actually a in the European Union, an EU medicines regulatory network, which has a roadmap document which is called the European Medicines Agency Network Strategy to 2025. And happily, actually, one of the main points of these documents are the strategic network goals. And on AMR, there are 6 strategic network goals, which actually go a bit beyond AMR. They also look at other emerging health threats. You can see them here, and I'm not going to read them out loud to you, but actually, you know, all the activities that I will be talking about actually fit very well into those strategic goals and address them from our perspective. Next slide, please. So the first thing is updating guidance to developers. I already mentioned at the beginning of my expose the fact that we have a number of guidance documents for antibacterials that we have developed over the years. The main stay of this is the guideline on the evaluation of medicinal products indicated for the treatment of bacterial infections, which we shortly call in our jargon on day-to-day the Antibacterial Guideline. This one actually has come into force at the well, I think 7-8 years ago, but now we have a revision which is highlighted on this slide in red that actually was supposed to even be finalized. You see that the document is from 2019, but when the COVID pandemic kicked in, you know, all our activities were affected to a certain extent, and this one hasn't yet been finalized. But it's an important document. It actually you know, what it does, it actually provides the developers with the view of the EMA and of its scientific committees on how the clinical trials that are supposed to be conducted in view of a European approval for an antibiotic, what are the views of the regulator on that. So it's quite an important document, even if it's not yet fully finalized. So, you know, actually the view of the regulator also concordant to the scientific advices that we have been giving to different stakeholders, different sponsors, is there. This guideline has a number of addenda which pertain to more granular topics, like, as you see here, for instance, the guideline on the use of pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics in the development. So, you know, whenever we look at that part of the dossier, which is for an antibiotic, is very important. It's quite important to look at that guidance, which is to be read in conjunction with the main guideline. We also have a pediatric addendum, you know, the one which has the long name addendum to the guideline, tralala, to address pediatric specific clinical data requirements, or the pediatric addendum, this is how we call it. So we also actually have a document which is not listed here, which pertains to development of anti-TB drugs. So all of these are on our website, and again, I would warmly encourage you to have a look at them, to see what the requirements are. These are things that are quite important in assessing, once you have a dossier, in understanding whether what is proposed there for approval is or is not, or to what degree it is compliant to what the expectations of the EU regulator would be or are. We have, it's important to know that also in terms of scientific advice procedures, where we advise, you know, sponsors come in and ask certain questions, certain details about the clinical trials that they are conducting, and actually not only clinical, it's also non-clinical and quality. So there can be all sorts of questions in a scientific advice, including actually also regulatory questions. With all these scientific advice procedures, we have had, despite the fact that actually the antibiotic pipeline in terms of new antibiotics is not as full as we would want it to be, we had quite a number of scientific advices over the last 6 years, which are actually more than in the previous 18. So it's quite an important increase. Next slide, please. Well, before going to another thing that we are doing, I would like, as I said already, to highlight those two parts of the guideline, of the draft guideline, the one that was highlighted in red on the previous slide, pertaining to resistance and to a tool that we have developed and we have agreed upon, and we actually had already approved drugs with this pathway, which is called the pathogen-specific indication in patients with limited treatment option. There, actually, what this is talking about is a clinical program for a test agent, for a test antibiotic or a combination that is expected to be clinically active against multi-drug resistant organisms for which there are limited licensed treatment options. So both this part, you could, if you are convinced that, of course, we are talking here about a drug that addresses that is relevant for treating a multi-drug resistant organism, you could use this pathway to approve it. And again, I'm just again advocating for reading the guideline to understand what are the criteria and how you could make use of this tool. Next slide, please. In terms of another thing that we are doing, we are interacting with international regulators. This interaction is actually, it's multifactorial. You see on these slides the most important activities that we are having. First of all, we have with the United States Food and Drug Administration, which is one of the other stringent regulatory authorities, we have developed together a process of parallel scientific advice. Why are we doing this? Why are we talking to the regulators? Why are we advising together? Because I think the development of a drug can be and needs to be a global development. Most of the time, the clinical trials are run in multiple jurisdictions, so we need to have as much as possible convergence related to the expectations of more than one regulator. So that's why we have this parallel scientific advice in which we review in parallel the questions with the FDA. We discuss in a teleconference, we provide oral feedback to the sponsor, and we sometimes provide individual formal feedback as an outcome. There are also other initiatives. We have a consultative advice option that we do with the FDA. And importantly, we have new development plans that we mutually discuss in a four-agency format with the FDA, with the Japanese authority, the PMDA, with Health Canada, on a monthly basis. So whenever we have a new antibiotic, we have a teleconference in which we discuss with all these four agencies this development. We have had tripartite meetings with the Japanese and with the US regulator a number of times, and actually we are foreseeing to have some more. Next slide, please. I'm trying to speak a bit faster, Martin, so that we catch up on time. You see on this slide, actually, one of the, one or two of the low-hanging fruits that we were able to agree upon in these interactions are, the primary endpoints for a few of the indications you see here that the FDA and the EMA had whenever it came to the primary endpoint expected for complicated urinary tract infections, different requirements. So we have, looked into what has led us to ask for these, and we have discussed and agreed to have a proposal and to converge into one single endpoint for these studies, so that, of course, you have only one statistical analysis plan, and things are actually made much easier for the developer. Next slide, please. The other one is here you see that instead of conducting separate trials in CUTI and which is complicated urinary tract infection and pyelonephritis, we have agreed that it's acceptable to include both of them in a study with some limitations in terms of numbers with each of the condition in the study. Next slide, please. Another question. So, and I think this question I've seen it already on the chat. What are the potential alternatives to antibiotics to treat bacterial infections? And maybe we can put some alternatives on the screen. And I think one of the alternatives is the one that was mentioned in the question I saw. So please, I think the query is now open.
So the alternatives you're giving them, Radu, is bacteriophage, monoclonal antibodies, vaccines,
and
or potentially all of them.
Yes.
So
all of them, correct.
Let's correct. Just see what people are saying. Bacteriophage, it's always comes up as an interesting solution. So bacteriophage,
yes,
vaccines, monoclonal antibodies, or all of them. And you know what? I don't think leaving longer will actually change.
Yes, I think yes, I agree. Let's stop it here. I think, and you chose the right answer. All the answers are correct. So well done for that. Let's go back to the slides. And next slide, please. You see here indeed that we have these alternatives on which we are actually focusing. We understand that it's important to look also into alternatives to antibiotics. That's definitely the case, in particular since you have this pipeline with antibiotics that is not very great. So indeed, we actually had also, I think, a few years ago, we had a workshop on bacteriophages and how they could fit in. There are some regulatory issues, I must say, which are related actually to the need of changing the composition of the medicinal product over time. The other important thing is that at present, there is a lack of solid clinical data showing that bacteriophages work. In order to approve them as a medicinal product, apart from what I said about the composition, you would need to make sure that they are efficacious, so that they show efficacy. And unfortunately, there have been a number of attempts to show that in at least one large study that actually has failed. So we still haven't seen yet definitive proof in a large clinical trial that yes, they work. We know that they are used in certain countries, apparently with quite success. There is some tradition in some of them, I think. But we, as regulators, we would need to see compelling data that indeed they work, and we are willing to work together with any sponsor that wishes to develop bacteriophages to try to guide them so that if the results of the study are positive, that we can bring it to the patients. The other important thing are monoclonal antibodies. Actually, here we are looking at a variety of targets. We have approved a couple of them recently. Actually, there is one that we have approved for the prevention of Clostridium difficile, which is baslotuzumab, which has the name Zimplava. And then we have another one which we have approved for the treatment and post-exposure prophylaxis of anthrax, which is called obeltoxaximab. So here some of the developments have really come to the market and have been approved. We also are looking into vaccines, not only into vaccines for healthcare-associated infections. I think another important thing is that you really need to one of the important tools is to prevent an infections. In order, also of course, if you prevent infections, the total number of infections is lower, and therefore also the magnitude of what can become the AMR menace is and will be smaller. Next slide, please. I would like to ask you, what do you believe is the prudent use of antibiotics? This is something that we hear a lot of times. You use antibiotics prudently. Well, what does this mean? So you see here, I put some options. I will read them out loud to you. So it's a use that provides the desired therapeutic effect. It's a use that maximizes the therapeutic effect while minimizing the development of AMR. It's a lower use of the antimicrobial agent, or it's a responsible use of the antimicrobial agent. So please click on the buttons according to your views. And I see in the meantime, you know, I see in the slide on the chat that one of the comments is that monoclonals are very expensive. What about the cost effectiveness ratio? And this is an important thing that I will tackle further on. You know, it's this discussion about the cost versus benefit risk. Of course, we as a regulator, we look at the benefit risk of the product. So, you know, if the benefits are overall exceed the risks, then we say that the benefit risk balance is positive and we can approve, and we approve actually the drug. Now, of course, some considerations and important considerations are about the cost of that preparation. And here we are looking at the health technology assessment bodies, the payers, so to speak, that of course look into that aspect. We have, in recognition of the fact that this is important in bringing the product to the patients in Europe, and you will see, as I said, I don't want to preempt what I will say myself, is that we are working together with health technology assessment, trying to understand, you know, what really is worth being reimbursed, so to speak. Also, because you will see there are some issues with regard to that, because we are looking at the benefit risk, and sometimes, you know, the trials are designing in such a way that for HTAs, for health technology assessment, is more difficult. So I think we have, in the meantime, I have filled in this gap. I think we can stop the poll here. And I'm very happy to see that actually the vast majority chose the first two. Actually, according to the WHO, the first one is correct. So yes, I think the majority chose the right one, but I would agree with you that responsible use is also quite frequently used as a synonym. It's not a perfect synonym, and I won't be entering into that, but I don't think I would also consider that this is a very acceptable response. Let's go back to the slides, please. The next one, please. Now, I mean, you know, from the previous one, I appreciate we know what we are talking about, so that's already excellent. What can we do as a regulator on prudent use of antibiotics in humans? You know, one of the important concepts is that while we understand and we recognize that all antibiotics need to be preserved and used rationally, we as a regulator, this is our thinking, we should not dictate criteria for clinical practice. For example, by defining line of use for reasons other than benefit risk. And, you know, just to say, you know, we approve a drug in a centralized procedure that is for which the authorization is valid in all the 27 EU member states. Of course, the epidemiological situation will differ, maybe between, let's say, North and South of Europe. There are local guidelines that are important, and so we are concentrating on the benefit risk and allow then, you know, we have a standard sentence that says consideration should be given to relevant therapeutic guidelines. So, you know, allowing the practitioner to adapt as per the local situation. And this is an important concept. We should not, in the indication, mandate more beyond what the benefit risk considerations are. The other important thing is about old antibiotics, where you have SMPCs, so summary of product characteristics, that are, you know, are actually old. You know, you can say some of them are outdated, most likely. So this is actually the most valuable contribution to rational use for us as a regulator, to ensure that we have this product information of these old antibiotics updated. And when I say updated, we need to look at the indication of use, at the dosage regimen, all in a harmonized way for all the healthcare professionals. This is something that we are conducted in a set of you know, procedures that we call referrals. And we have conducted quite a few for the old antibiotics with very good results, so that we are proud to say that actually many of them are now harmonized and modernized, so that the doctors, whenever they read the product information, they can be reassured that the information is as much as possible up to date. Next slide, please. I'm not going to read again, in the interest of time, all these and speak 5 minutes to each of these options. But what I mean to convey here is the following message. We have regulatory tools for any medicine that is addressing an unmet need. And as we discussed, multi-drug resistant pathogens or infections produced by these agents are an unmet need in the European Union at present. You just need to remember two things. We have tools that are in the legislation, in the acquis communautaire, so to speak, and we are talking here about the conditional marketing authorization and about the marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances. We have also the accelerated assessment, which actually is a reduced assessment time for products of major public health interest. And we have also tools to address compassionate use, which are actually made available to patients before granting the marketing authorization. And then, we as EMA, we have also provided additional tools to developers. We have a scheme which is called the Prime scheme, which actually is a support scheme where we have an early dialogue and an enhanced scientific dialogue for these products that we consider worth in terms of addressing unmet medical need, this being one of the criterion to be admitted into Prime. We have a group at the EMA which is called the Innovation Task Force, which you will see on one of my last slides, that is the forum for informal early dialogue with sponsors. And we have also other things, adaptive pathways, but I won't speak more to that. Next slide, please. And this is what I was talking about. It's this group. We have actually launched it back in 2019. It's actually opened to all the developers that work on, developing a drug for the treatment or prevention of bacterial and fungal infections. So, if you are a developer and you want to have an early interaction with the EMA, to have a forum for dialogue with the regulators, this is actually a good way to start. Of course, I need to say that we actually support an innovative drug. Here, we are not looking into, Me Too's and this kind of drugs, but we are actually willing to give support to those innovative products. And of course, we invite all the developers working on this type of medicines to enter into dialogue with us. It's free of charge. Maybe this is also nice to say. And it can be on everything, be it scientific, be it legal, be it regulatory, or any other thing. It's conducting in a brainstorming style. We have a discussion with the sponsor, then we have a bit of an informal discussion. There are a few also formal steps to consider in order to contact the EMA. There is a template, and you have here the link if you're interested to click on it and see how it goes. Next slide, please. Now, we came also to the story of the costs that you very nicely anticipated in the chat. Of course, for a company, for a drug developer, the profit is also important, and you need to come on profits at some point, potentially. So how many years do you think it takes on average for a new antibiotic to make profit? Is it 5? Is it? I put some numbers actually, just to confuse you a little bit, I must admit, in the sense that they are not the 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 or something like that, which may have made it a little bit easier to guess, I suppose. So I'm curious to see, what do you think?
Interesting.
Well, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Please don't shy away. And But it's very interesting, I think, for yourselves as well to see what colleagues believe. I mean,
okay, I think.
Okay, I think we have a winner
yeah, so
to start with. So maybe we can stop it here. Well, you will be surprised. Actually, the one which has come last is the correct one. So it's 23 years. 23 years. Can we go back to my slides? This is staggering. I agree with you. I mean, you see here before going to the next slide, can you go to the previous one? I put it here. How many years? You know, if you hear 23 is the answer, maybe you can say like here, let's party and have some beers, you know, actually. So let's go to the next slide, which actually shows the real answer, which, you know, if you start from the preclinical research, continuing with the clinical one, continuing to everything after approval, which is the sales that are on patent, you see that the break-even point is about pretty much 23 years. That's staggering. That's a lot. And this is probably, definitely actually one of the reasons for which, you know, new antibiotics are developed less and less. And actually many of the major players in the industry have gone out of this field. Because, of course, you know, if you develop a drug for cholesterol, well, that one brings more revenue. Most likely is a chronic condition. And, you know, there are many other chronic conditions that are as appealing as the cholesterol. So it's not only that. But just to say, just to give you a little bit of feeling of how difficult it is to come on profit for an antibiotic. Next slide, please. In view of that, you know, we, not only we as regulators, but, you know, working together with colleagues from the Commission, with, you know, discussing with other regulators, with other authorities, with industry, importantly, you know, we have come to understand that there is a need actually to provide some incentives, to incentivize the, you know, the development of antibiotics. There are so-called push and pull incentives. So, you know, the push ones are actually that work at the beginning, you know, at the discovery / early phases of development of the drug. And here, you know, we have a number of, you know, incubators, as we would call them, that, you know, look and try to finance certain important compounds. And we have a European body which is called JPI-AMR. And again, if you go and Google JPI-AMR, or you put jpimr.eu, you will see that actually what they are doing in order to, you know, to foster these activities. We have another one which is called CARBAX. We have the grants from the European Commission through the DG Research. So, you know, we have a number of push incentives in place. So actually financial means that help the developers of these drugs at the beginning of the developing. And then, of course, once the drug is on approved, let's say on the market, the problem in terms of revenue is that, of course, the easy law and the easy to understand law is the more you sell, the more you earn, isn't it? But the problem here is that, of course, you don't want to overuse an antibiotic. And so here you either make a system by which you incentivize that drug so that the company finds it, you know, lucrative actually, by either delinking fully the market entry reward. So, you know, you reward them, you provide them, you give them some money, which is not based on any sales figures, or you make a bit of a combination. There is some sales-based income combined with a fixed share, so to speak, a fixed reward. There are several initiatives actually in the EU and in the United States. We discussed them in different fora. There is the European Drive AB project that has just come to an end. There is the TATFAR, which is the Transatlantic Task Force for Anti-Microbial Resistance. There are other fora, and importantly, it is one of the recognized goals in the European Medicines Agency network strategy. So we are really willing to get involved and, you know, to make things work, because we understand that without that aspect, which in the past we haven't looked into, it's very difficult to, if not impossible, to go with new antibiotics. Next slide, please. And just to mention also what I was saying a few minutes ago about health technology assessment. There are a couple of problems actually when it comes to assessing, the HTA, the payer, so to speak, to when such a body looks and assesses a new drug in order of financing it, reimbursing it from public money, they look at a certain number of criteria. And one of the important things that they want to know is whether what's the benefit? Why would we finance this drug and not another drug? And of course, here they would like to see, in order to make an informed decision, a demonstration of clinical superiority, meaning that my drug, the candidate to be financed, is superior to another drug that, for instance, is, let's say, golden standard or whatever else. Unfortunately, most of the time, for us as regulators, we are looking, as I said, at the benefit risk. We are not looking at the costs when we approve a drug. And most of the time, we have a non-inferiority design, which for us is sufficient to conclude on the benefit risk, but sometimes for the HTA body is not ideal, let's say. These HTA bodies in general, the payer does not offer the opportunity to demonstrate, for the sponsor to demonstrate the public health benefit of an antibiotic, including the tackling AMR. So we are looking here at an important public health advantage that is sometimes more difficult to disentangle from a regulator assessment, but also from an HTA assessment. So, in recognition of all these things, we have liaised, and we are liaising now, as far as I know, on a regular basis with our European, the payers in the European Union are all grouped together in a EUNet, European network. So EUNet HTA is called. The EUNet, how we say it, in a anglicized way. We are in regular contact, and I'm very happy to tell you that we have had actually quite recent useful discussions on a number of antibacterials that address this AMR. Next slide, please. I'm a human, I work in the human sector at the EMA. I'm also a physician by formation. I have worked with patients but of course, in the One Health approach plan against AMR that I mentioned to you in my presentation, one of the things that I said is this One Health approach. No, essentially we cannot and will never be able to tackle AMR if we are only looking at the human aspects. We also need to consider how is the use of antibiotics in animals and actually also in agriculture and other things, when we are looking at, let's say, antifungals. So my question to you, I think it's a bit rhetoric, I must admit, but do you believe it's important, and why? Why is it important to look into AMR in animals? So I tried to put some options here. So two are with yes, and there is an additional yes because, and two are with no. So this one, based on just what I said, I disclosed a little bit what the correct answer is. I'm very happy to see that. Yeah, I think you really. There is no miss.
I think they've got it, Radu.
Yes, I think so, and I'm very happy. Let's stop it here. You got the right answer, of course. It's important, so that's the first thing. Yes, it is important. It can lead, whenever you overuse an antibiotic in an animal, you actually can lead to acquisition of AMR, and this can be passed to humans. This is why it's so important. This is why the One Health approach. Well, I just as a last one, I still think there was an outlier to that. But anyway, that's how it is. Let's go back to the slides. We understand that it's important to look into that. Of course, if a vet colleague would be next to me, they would be even more informed. But just to tell you, I want to give you a gist of what we are doing in this field, in the veterinary field. And you know that the EMA has a specific division dealing with veterinary medicinal products and their approval in the EU, actually. There are a number of important activities related to scientific advice, actually. So on that one, we work together with our sister agencies. And here I'm talking about the Food Safety Authority, the European Food Safety Authority, the EFSA, and with the European Center for Disease Controls, with the ECDC. We have already, during the last few years, given opinions, so scientific opinions, on measures to reduce the need to use antimicrobial agents in animal husbandry in the EU, together with the EFSA. It's called the RONAFA report that you see on the slide there. I tried to put a snapshot of the report, so that's something you may wish to look into as well. And of course, with the ECDC and with the EFSA, we give advice on the impact on public health and animal health of the use of antibiotics in animals. There have been also other groups, other important initiatives. Not lastly, the AMEG. So the AMEG is actually a group of experts. Essentially, there is this acronym that I think stands for I think it's a group of experts looking into that. I can't remember actually what it stands for. I'm sorry for that, but actually they have the tasks to look into this categorization of antimicrobials based on their risk to public health due to the development of AMR following use in animals. And I think another thing that they have and they are looking into is the development of a preliminary risk profiling of antibiotics, which actually is intending to address the risk to public health from AMR, and is something that will be assessed prior to the submission of a marketing authorization application. Next slide, please. Another important thing is actually the European surveillance of veterinary antimicrobial consumption. The acronym is ESVAC. This produces actually a report which is published, and the last one actually that we have published shows happily, actually, it's good news that the European countries continue to reduce the use of antibiotics in animals. And actually, I think the overall sales of veterinary antibiotics in the European countries dropped by more than 34% between 2011 and 2018, if I remember correct. So that's quite of an achievement. And I think, also the total sales of certain veterinary antibiotics belonging to antibiotic classes that we consider critically important in human medicine decreased quite noticeably in that same time period. We actually include in this antibiotics that we use to treat serious infections in humans, caused by disease-resistant bacteria, the multiple drug-resistant bacteria. And just to give you some examples, actually, sales of third and fourth generation cephalosporins dropped by around 1/4. Polymyxins dropped by 70%. And I think fluoroquinolones a bit less. I think it's something around 5%, and sales of other quinolones quite importantly also over 70%. So that's quite good news. Next slide, please. There is, as you will know, a new veterinary legislation that has been adopted and that will come into place, I think, end of January of next year in the whole of the EU. And this legislation also, it's actually this regulation 2019-5 of the European Parliament of the Council that you see on screen. In the legislations, there are provisions that the EMA should provide advice on the criteria for the designation of antimicrobials to be reserved for human medicine. and for methods for collecting data on sales and consumption of antimicrobials in the EU. And so I'm happy to tell you that quite extensive work is ongoing to address these points. There are a few challenges in the vet sector. Some of them are common to what we see in the human sector. Actually, also here, there are no truly new antimicrobial classes that have been introduced in the recent years, while there is a need for effective antimicrobial treatment of animals. And, here we are not talking about for instance, growth promoting, which has been banned in the EU since quite a while. But unfortunately, there are still countries in the world that use antibiotics as growth promoters. Here we are talking about treatment for prevention or treatment, actually, of an infectious disease in an animal. And of course, there we would need some tools, some antibiotics to treat the animals. The SMPCs of antimicrobials have been updated for transmission of resistance. I think importantly, one of the targets is the reduction of antimicrobial use, and there are these specific groups that are being followed. I seen on the chat a question here about generic, whether the information of antibacterial resistance needs to be updated by the applicant or is sufficient to refer to data from the reference product dossier. But I think without being myself, I'm not in regulatory affairs, but I would imagine that also in the vet sector, the same principles apply. I think in any case, we need to have the information in the dossier, whether it's where it's coming from. It's something that needs to be very obvious. I mean, it can have a part that may refer to a reference product in case of a generic, but I think is definitely something that needs to be looked into on a case-by-case basis, also depending on how these drugs are developed and what the changes are. But essentially, it's important to have the information at hand at least. I mean, you cannot have something. Please look into the other. Every medicinal product needs to be assessed. The benefit risk needs to be assessed on its own merit. So you need to have the information at hand in order to assess it to start with. Right. I've come to an end. I think ahead of time, so we still have some time for open questions. That's good. These are the take-home messages. So what I think would be important for you to remember from my talk today is it's a major public health threat. It's growing. This is something that we need to worry, all of us, okay? So I think we need to be worried and to work together to tackle it. That's the first thing. Otherwise, I mean, just for those of you who haven't been convinced by myself today, which I hope won't be too many, otherwise, we will go back to the pre-antibiotic era in which, you could die from an infection age 38 or something like that. That would be really bad. And also other things, just imagine the, the incredible advances in surgery and, all this robotic surgery and all these things will be at risk because, of course, if you get an infection and if that infection is not treatable, well, the fact that the surgery has gone well is not enough for the patients, and the patient may die from an infection with a bug that cannot be treated. So, very important thing. It's good to know that there has been increased public and political awareness over the last decade, at least in the European Union. It would be interesting maybe to also hear whether in your respective countries the situation is the same, but even if it's not even more so, I think you should be motivated to do this. And as I said, to try to go out and to explain to the public, to our leaders, why this is important and why it needs to be supported. it's important to cooperate, as I said, cooperate and coordinate measures. Nobody can make it on their own. We cannot just, at the national level, as exceptional as we may be, like COVID actually, also AMR has no borders. If you do an excellent job in your country, but your neighbor does not a job as excellent as yours, well, the problem is there. So I think it's very important to cooperate, to coordinate with, with other national and overnational authorities like we are, all these measures. And then remember that, we as the EU regulator for medicinal products, we try to fight AMR, and that we take pride in saying that we actually do fight AMR by a number of measures, by updating the guidance to developer, which is very important, so that the developer understand what our expectations are, by interacting with all the stringent regulatory authorities at an international level to allow to have, as much as possible, a single development, which, and I need to stress that this is not always possible, because sometimes the legislative framework is different. So you cannot, if the legislation in another country is, for instance, mandate a certain direction, even if you would want to harmonize, it's sometimes difficult. But all the places in which science allow us to harmonize, and certain provisions do not stop us from harmonizing, in all those cases we are working together so that we simplify the task of developers in that perspective, by at the same time maintaining the high standards of scrutiny, so to make sure that the public, whenever the public and the prescribers are using the drug, they are reassured that it's safe and effective. We are focusing on alternative therapies, as I tried to show you, coming from bacteriophages, but also going to monoclonal antibodies, which are actually a little bit more advanced. We are promoting prudent use by these two important things that I would like to remind to you. So, modernizing and harmonizing the SMPC of old antibacterials, and the other one that, of course, is as I said, I'm very sorry. I think there is an additional noise here. Sorry. Yes, we try to make best use of our regulatory tools to speed up approval for medicines. We engage with developers of medicines that tackle AMR, as I shown you, and we try to work together with our vet colleagues, and respect things that are both in the legislation or are important, so that we are all working under this One Health approach. I will stop here to allow you. I thank you very much for your attention and for your contribution, and I would like to invite you to ask any question you may have.
Thank you very much, Radu. So as a reminder, please, you can raise your hand and ask Radu a question directly yourself. You don't, or you can type it into the chat function. And perhaps while colleagues are sort of formulating questions in their heads, Radu, your last slide presented sort of a range of options.
Yes.
I'm putting you on the spot, but if you had to pick one thing that would actually make the biggest impact, the biggest difference, what would it be?
From all these things here listed of what we are doing in terms of AMR, well, I think it's difficult to choose, but I personally believe that we as regulators, we should look into promoting the prudent use. This is actually a very important contribution. This is something that is, so to speak, the low-hanging fruit, but that doesn't mean to say that the others are less important. So that's my personal choice. Let's put it this way.
I think that's probably a fair comment. And actually, I wonder whether some of the participants, we've got about 10 minutes left. We don't necessarily need to take it all, but it would be interesting to hear experiences in your own countries, perhaps even in the region, actually, just about what your efforts you've been doing.
Actually, this is. Thank you, Martin, for asking this. I was I was actually intending to ask myself, since if there are no questions, what actually is the situation in your respective countries when it comes to, for instance, the national action plans against the AMR? Do you have those things? Are they already in place, or are they in preparation? We know that at least the WHO, but also ourselves, we have, strongly encouraged countries to work on national action plans on AMR. If you have no other question, I would be interested to hear from you. What's the situation in your respective countries?
So this is the moment to press the unmute button.
I would, if you allow me, this is Meryem Haji Hamza from
Hello.
Macedonian Agency for
Hello.
Medicines.
Hello.
I would like to thank you for your comprehensive presentation. Actually, you did cover the scientific, the regulatory, and a bit of social dimension of the issue, and thank you for that. I do believe that most of the countries have established their national strategy on combating AMR, because we did so. We organize continuously these 10 years webinars on raising awareness, not only for healthcare professionals, but for broad public also. This is, I think, the good way to improve the rational use of antibiotics, because in this way you can save the public health, but you can save money for your country, and
Definitely.
It is of great importance for developing and countries in transition. So these are one of the measures that can contribute to improving rational use of antibiotics, but I believe there are still measures that can be undertaken and further improve the issue.
Oh, definitely. We need to. Thank you very much for this intervention, and I'm very glad to hear that you are, on the same page with us with respect to these things. I totally agree with you. It's important both from the public health dimension as well as from the economic dimension that you mentioned, which may be even more relevant for some countries than for others. But I think all in all, I think it's important that we indeed work together. We work together to tackle this, and I can only agree with you that it's much more work to be done. We cannot sleep happily because there's still much to do. And actually, as I showed you, the menace is there, and the forecast is grim. So we cannot just say we have some things, and we need to constantly work with all the stakeholders, starting from the public to the maybe bigger stakeholders, to the regulators, to the public health authorities, to the practitioners, with everybody, so that the plan, I suppose, details those measures for the different categories, who does what. A component that I haven't been touch basing upon today is the learning component. It's also important that new generations of physicians, but also of the public, at different levels, of course, and in different ways, get aware about, these aspects. I think, the physicians, we have, when I graduated my medical school many years ago, AMR was not really on the curriculum as such, because it was not perceived at the time that it was something worth probably including. Of course, as an infectious disease person, once you start treating patients, you realize the menace is there and is with us in hospitals, and I'm very convinced that this is very important, and I think it's mandatory that we work together, try to help each other, try to inspire ourselves, try to cooperate together, try to see what can be implemented, what is worth implementing. And actually, I'm happy to say that there are initiatives that we are part of as well, sometimes as observers, but that can be looked into, doing visits to other stakeholders and trying to understand what they are doing. So I think we can work on this more in the future.